Alright, what's up guys, Single Player Nacho here. And it's time for Game Over. Going out with a bang requires brutal, horrific, final bosses. And these are the most brutal found in the Resident Evil series. But just like any good story, there must be a way to stop these mega maniacs. Sure, they may be very cunning, violent, and they basically want to destroy the entire planet for some odd reason. There's always a way and a will to supply their downfall. So how did these titans end up failing? Just a little caution, there may be spoilers up ahead, so without further ado, let's get to it. First up, Resident Evil Dead Aim Morpheus Tyrant. The Morpheus Tyrant is not a very well-known final boss in the Resident Evil games. I wonder why, just look at that presence. The introduction of the Morpheus Tyrant, its electric powers, how the lights in the room begin to falter as it approaches the protagonist. Some scary stuff. You see, the Morpheus Tyrant was actually Morpheus Duval, a powerful former Umbrella Corporation executive. But Morpheus was fired for being a pretty sick puppy. I mean, could you imagine being fired by Umbrella for not following their already effed up rules? So Morpheus Duval, being so obsessed with beauty and themselves, actually formed a cult to go against Umbrella. Ultimately, this ploy failed, and at the very end of Resident Evil Dead Aim, Morpheus Duval injected the T+G virus, which created the Morpheus Tyrant. And it's a very beautiful creation. Just as Morpheus was obsessed with their looks, its fatal attacks range from high-speed strikes, electric shocks, flippy stuff, and slaying the hell out of that runway. Look at that walk. The downfall to the Morpheus Tyrant is that big-ass electro gun you have to use against it. Use it enough, and you will end this horrible person's life for good. Next up, Resident Evil 1 Tyrant. At a staggering 8'2" or 262 centimeters in height. This thing's not very intimidating, is it? I mean, it automatically dwarves Chris Redfield with its completely nude appearance. I mean, the Tyrant's heart is literally sticking out of its chest. This is very much a bioweapon that's under production. It's not ready for testing, and that's the essential vibe this boss fight gives off. We're fighting against a very aggressive and tall baby, if you will. And that aggression, those long-distance lunges towards the character, sharp claw attacks, violent rage actually might be inspired by the Tyrant's base form. Umbrella looked up convicts, prisoners with great genes, to use for Tyrant experimentation. So when you finally fight this thing, it's extremely primal. It attacks you like an animal would. It's not very intelligent at all, and that's what ultimately leads to its downfall. Splat. Next up, Resident Evil Revelations Jack Norman. Revelations includes very fishy foes inspired by aquatic life forms, if they were possessed, and extremely incredibly haunting in every regard. So what would the final boss of this awesome game, scary game, be? I give you Jack Norman, an asshole. Well, that's until Jack Norman injects himself with that T-Abyss, and what we get in exchange, a hideous transformation, definitely brutal. The Jack Norman boss fight is a culmination of all the horrid things that happen within the Queen Zenobia, amped up to 11. I mean, the guy is built like a bodybuilding turtle, and again, an outside heart. Wonder why that is. That's the weak spot. I just think it's incredibly scary how Jack Norman slowly edges towards you and still has the capability to teleport, and I mean teleport like science fiction movie, right in front of you in rapid succession. What ultimately leads Jack Norman to his demise was his allegiance to Veltro, which is the cult of his making. He wanted to purify the entire world, thinking that it had become too sinful by destroying it. Instead, he ended up destroying himself and that loyalty lasted up until his very last second.
Done. Everything finished. Finally, I can die. I can die.
Next up, Resident Evil 6, Derek Simmons. You know, I think we all have a bit of adoration for Ada Wong, but Simmons here is on a whole other level. It was his life's mission to clone Ada Wong. Being so in love with her, he wanted to witness the birth of Ada Wong. That is some obsessive shit right there. Now, not just anyone can do that. Simmons just so happens to be the head of the family, the puppet masters behind many viruses, many outbreaks, and the assassination of the President of the United States. These are some shady characters, Derek Simmons being the biggest one, but the sharp knife of betrayal is always around the corner. Simmons was ultimately betrayed by everyone who he thought had under his grasp. He's infected with an enhanced version of the C virus, and what we receive as a final boss in Resident Evil 6 is actually a pretty fascinating piece of human anatomy. Parts of this guy's flesh separate, groups up, and become even more gross. Even more fascinating is the sequence where he uses his tentacles. Where did this guy even get tentacles from? Completely breaks down these C virus minions head to toe. It's like a violent and bloody version of the Transformers, and just encapsulates them into his own organism. Very freaky stuff. This guy was a pretend puppet master. He got away with a lot of things. But at the end of the day, thinking you are invincible, well, here's a nice little impaling scene. Next up, Resident Evil Code Veronica, Alexia Ashford. If a child has this look on their face, you might want to pay a visit to the exorcist, the nearest exorcist in town. So when we get to officially beat with Alexia Ashford as an adult and as a final boss, who's done many, many bad and evil things, this is a demon if there ever was one in the Resident Evil games. Lots of biblical imagery here. She combusts and all of her clothing falls off, revealing a very poisonous appearance. Her flesh turns into roots of disgustingness, and Alexia Ashford is born again as a very powerful final boss and BOW. Now this scene is pretty awesome by itself, but the theme that's playing during this, it's pretty damn cool. And when we get to the final fight between Alexia and the Redfields, she gains many different forms, insect forms. It's very impressive how this was achieved in a very early stage. First of all, she arrives as a cocoon. What an entrance. And the thing about Alexia is that once you think you've beaten her, she becomes even stronger and even more stomach-turning. A giant meat bulge emanates from Alexia's back, I think, and this spawns another insect organism, along with poisonous little tentacles, spikes, and a very, very disturbing face. If you thought it was over there, you're very mistaken. Alexia's little bug army comes out to play, and there are many of them, running up the walls, heading towards Mama Insect, Alexia. She then very disgustingly pops out as a flying bug. See, now I understand why people want to see this remade. This would honestly look amazing in today's graphics. It's still pretty disturbing today, but she's still just a bug. And that weakness is what drags this exorcist child 6 feet under. Next up, Resident Evil Village, Mother Miranda. Honestly, what's crazier than a psychotic scientist that kind of looks like Kim Kardashian, who then loses her child? Well, you get Mother Miranda, the big baddie in the village, and we all thought that Lady Dimitrescu would be the big baddie. Well, she is pretty big, but Mother Miranda is the final boss here. The final stage in Resident Evil Village sets up what would be an epic atmosphere for a battle for Rose. Miranda's Megamycete is running rampant. It's throwing up enemies as you approach the big bad one. And when you get there, you find a very endearing scene if we didn't know anything about what was actually going on. Mother Miranda spawns Rose in a mold bath, rebirthed as Ava. She's very happy, and then her power starts to fade. Ethan Winters has come to save the baby. But watch out, you probably should stay away from someone who has used up generations of their time, killed millions easily, or at least in effect killed millions, through viruses and monsters to get their child back. No, you're up for a big fight. In essence, Miranda becomes a witch, one that easily swoops her way towards your hands, viciously flies towards you, and the scariest thing, fades into darkness. Everything becomes a hallucination, a darkened realm that Ethan must pray that Miranda's not behind him. But they're all just hallucinations. It's all a big delusion. And that's what I believe leads to Miranda's death. No matter how hard she tries, she will never get her daughter back.
My daughter! My Eva!
Next up, Resident Evil 4, Osmund Saddler. As soon as you find that first portrait, Saddler portrait, you know this guy's gonna be a dick. It was just a matter of how big of a dick was this guy gonna be, or at least how brutal and dangerous was this fellow. Well, Saddler has two forms that we can actually judge his range of attacks as his first base form. There's some tentacle stuff that comes with some punches, but that speed is pretty insane. I never would have guessed with a man of his age to be that fast and deadly. Now his final form is why he's pretty close to the top of this list. I hope no one in this audience has a phobia of bulging eyes. Pretty sure that's a phobia, because Saddler is not your type. This grotesque transformation, it perfectly explains why he's not only on here, but just look at his corpse that's left behind like a little piece of shit dangling around. Not only that, but the boss fight is pretty hard. On professional difficulty anyway, not using any infinite weapons or any of that. First round, professional difficulty is hard. But that special red rocket is, well, Saddler antidote. But what led to his downfall, really, outside of just being a magnificent royal being, a religious zealot? It was his ambition. Just look at how insane his plan for world domination was. The file Our Mission perfectly explains just how lustful this man was for power. I think that's what leads to his death. Though I will say that he did stoke some flames. Some of his plan did work, but at the end of the day, he did die and did not see them out. Next up, Resident Evil Survivor, HYPNOS Tyrant. Resident Evil Survivor is a tiny shoot-'em-up game you may not have played, so the final boss is going to be a little bit one-dimensional, but I thought it would be really important to have him on here, because he's a tyrant, so that makes him pretty cool, but also, how many forms this thing gets. The boss fight itself looks pretty straightforward. Just gotta shoot the tyrant. It's a shoot-'em-up game, so what do you expect? There's no crazy mechanics you're gonna get, but it's this nerve-wracking sound that the transformation makes. I'll just let you listen to it. Yeah, reminds me of mac and cheese for whatever reason. And when you think it's down and out, you better think twice. The HYPNOS Tyrant becomes even more deadlier, scarier, and even more of a bullet sponge. But when you again think this is over, think again. Like one of those cheesy 90s movies where the monster just keeps getting back up. HYPNOS is here, well, to mess up the pacing of this game, and what leads to the demise of the HYPNOS Tyrant. This is pretty hilarious, but it's actually missiles. Next up, Resident Evil 2, G, or better known as William Birkin. Birkin's first appearance will leave you asking, who the hell needs to take a shit that bad? Running above these platforms, these graded platforms, is a very dangerous thing to do. But we're dealing with a dangerous individual in William Birkin, the mastermind behind the G virus, co-developer of the T virus. Just about everything that's wrong in the pharmaceutical realm. Now yes, the Jekyll and Hyde inspiration is pretty apparent here. There's no fear to be had when you're facing the first stage of G. One arm's bigger than the other, I think we all know what's going on here. So you push him over a ledge and you dust off your Leon Kennedy hands. Job's done, but not quite yet. The later stages of G is where you want to start becoming more and more scared and frightened. A monster that easily overpowers, scrunches up like a little sponge his ex-wife now. This is a deadly foe we're dealing with here. And G Stage 3 is one of my personal favorite designs in all of Resident Evil. It's like a dinosaur that hasn't been discovered yet. Challenging, I will not leave that out. If you're not careful with reading this thing's combos, it will kill you. But it's Claire Redfield's side that takes the final form of G, a voluptuous blob of flesh that rushes at you at high speeds, jumps at you from high and tight angles, and my favorite touch is when it's dragging its body as it's slowly dying towards you. It's so cool. It's nothing a couple of acid rounds can't fix. Every monster has to die at some point, but not this thing. It just keeps coming back. And what I believe led to the demise of William Birkin, or G, was that never-ending, highly sought-after work on his virus. His work came first at all costs. And for a tiny smidgen, I do think his weakness was his daughter, but in a very, very messed up way. G is definitely a brutal final boss. And last but not least, Resident Evil 3, Nemesis. This is the ultimate killing machine. There's hardly any contest. It not only has the intelligence to gather where all the STARS members are located, this thing stalks. It's so powerful, so deadly, and yet it's killable. But the Nemesis does beat you into submission before achieving its goal. And that's why it was made in the first place. The later stages of Nemesis and its final boss form easily places it up there in the deadliest final bosses. The most dangerous thing about the Nemesis is that it adapts after it dies. Life will find a way, or at least meat faces like the Nemesis will find a way. The last stage of Resident Evil 3, a testing arena, is what houses a now fully formed Nemesis monster, spitting acid at you with its gross, pulsating bulges. But not to fear. What leads to this thing's demise is a big-ass ray gun. It ultimately boils down to better science. The Nemesis is a product of endless days and hours and years, probably, of experiments. Well, here's a nice little plasma to explode your brain.
Take the fucking hit!
Well, thank you so much for checking out this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Which was the deadliest boss in your mind? Comment down below the boss's name and the game they're from. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe for more horror lore, lists, and mysteries. All of your support, guys, is very much deeply appreciated throughout all the years. Thank you. Have an awesome rest of your day, and as always, stay single.